Welcome to r/MaliciousCompliance, where we share stories of people conforming to the letter, but not the spirit of request. And today we have 3 great stories, so subscribe, hit the like button, and let's begin. The first story: I quit my job and the company lost a valuable employee. The second story: I went to work one day after having a severe allergic reaction, got my manager fired, and then quit my job. The third story: client didn't listen to me because he was in a hurry. The first story: take away my OT? Okay. I was offered an SH salary and promotion to a job I was already doing through increased responsibility by being a good employee with great performance. I turned it down. I wasn't allowed to negotiate either, which I still did. F that rule. The counteroffer was still far less than median, which was the lowest I would go as I did a good job. It doesn't look good when employees refuse promotions, and near every manager in the company knows me. I'm the supply guy after all, so they tried taking my OT away. They had to be gunning after my pride and performance and not wanting to be fired. To note, I live a simple life and don't care for the money, but my friends in the company are in similar positions and have families and need the money. I can get another job easy enough that pays enough for me to live off of. I turned it down because it's not a lot of money to a big company and don't want to fuel mistreatment of its employees, my friends. I complied with no more OT, but I told them I needed the OT to do a good job. As a supply guy for a large company, I order millions of dollars of supplies throughout the year. I didn't have time to negotiate the big orders anymore. HR didn't care and my director boss didn't think I'd let my job performance drop. I started doing bare minimum within my HR provided copy and paste job description, and only 8-hour days. I sucked. I did the role above my job title to begin with, but they would never acknowledge this, or they'd have to pay me for it. So now I was spending $20,000+ more a month than I used to. Boss knew, but what could he do? He effed up. I'm the only person in the company with knowledge that can only be gained through experience to do the job. I'm also critical to many operations. This is small figures to a large company, and it's not like my boss in HR would tell people they messed up in my handling. He also spent the personnel budget on hiring his friend to be a director, so I heard later. So I stuck around until I had trained a replacement, since I didn't want to leave on a bad note. Since my great friends I made in the company are the managers I worked with daily for years. So then I left. It'd be a bad story if this was all. When I left, a lot of people were curious why. My friends near every manager weren't afraid to talk as my boss wasn't their boss. Without going into detail, I'm popular in my company for lower level workers. I've saved the day a few times and do all I can to make their job easier. Due to other complaints with HR and poor pay, me leaving fueled their discontent further to a noticeable performance level. This prompted an unofficial investigation by other directors. Our COO was the likely core of the problem. He hired my boss, his friend, and had a say in the HR director's hiring. Other directors soon drove them out, as it's hard to like a job when your employees and coworkers hate you. The HR director still works there and causes problems, but she no longer has a say in pay levels. A few managers and good employees got raises. There's still a lack of base pay though, if you ask me. Overall, I like to think I had a key role to play, as I knew a few directors on a personal level. I'm back at college after dropping out the first time for medical reasons, and still talk to my friends at the company regularly. For belief, this isn't made up since I'm not entirely detached from society. This isn't your regular big company. It grew rapidly in the last 5 years, and many directors were promoted up and still busy fighting the corporate mindset takeover from what I hear. If you're gonna mistreat us, pay for it and we'll be fine with it. One of my friends ended up getting a decrease in pay. She wasn't offered a promotion, but they just put her on salary. Her OT made up the time to be more than her salary, so they raised her salary to match and that's all. Now she's salary and expected to work OT. She was furious and ended up only working 8-hour days. They had to hire someone else to help. She doesn't mind anymore, but she no longer cares for the company. The second story is severe allergic reaction? Tough, you're not going home. Background: I'm from the UK, and this happened about 10 years ago. I was 17 or 18. I worked for a relatively large homewares and leisure store. I only worked Saturdays, and the odd Sunday, if they had overtime or were short-staffed. I didn't work every Sunday, as I also did karate on those mornings, and was competing in every championship I could. I was also still in full-time education, doing my A-levels at the time. I had had a few days off earlier in the year after 2 deaths in my family. My fiance, story for another time, and my grandpa, and being assaulted on the streets. My line manager, we'll call him misogynistic F, or MF for this story, was not all that understanding of any of these events. I'd been signed off for 2 weeks. 2 days to be exact, and when I came back to work after the assault with a broken wrist, I got permission from the store manager, Epic Boss or EB, to move to a different department, towards the back of the store, where there were less people. I'd been having really bad anxiety attacks. I normally worked tills, and MF came to find me to question why I'd been off for the last 2 weekends. I explained he was annoyed, as he had not been informed of this, and informed me that if I had any more unexplained absences in the next few months, I would be written up with a disciplinary. According to him, it was my fault that I had been attacked. I had found out in the July of that year that I was severely allergic to alcohol, like anaphylactic shock level severe. My first time drinking, I had a vodka and Coke, took 2, maybe 3 sips, and then woke up in hospital a few hours later. Bear in mind I had never touched alcohol before this point, so was not aware this would happen. Since then, I have been overly cautious of ordering drinks in loud places, as they may mishear what I've asked for. The event. In the November, a friend of mine and I went out for dinner on a Thursday night. The restaurant was quite loud. She ordered a vodka and lemonade. I ordered a half pint of lemonade. Our drinks were brought out. She checked the one in front of her first. Yep, hers was the vodka lemonade, so I drank mine. As soon as it hit my mouth, I knew something was wrong. I could smell peaches. I could feel my throat starting to swell. My friend noticed, grabbed my EpiPen from my bag, I always carry one just in case, and shouted for help. I must have passed out, as I again woke up in a hospital a few hours later. I was discharged Friday morning, and phoned my school to let them know I would not be coming in. I received 2 doctor's notes, one for school and one for work. However, because of the warning I had received from MF, and being a naive and quite nervous person, I was terrified of getting into trouble at work. So I went in. I handed the note to the EB, let her know of the situation, and she assured me that if I wasn't feeling too well, I could go home. I went up to the staff area to put my bag away, sit down for a bit before my shift started at 11. I'm sat chatting with a few coworkers when MF walks in. He sees that I'm a bit green around the gills. MF, what's wrong with you today, Gogi? Me, I've been a bit ill this week. He cuts me off. MF, I really don't care. You work 1 effing day a week. You're not going home. He walks out of the room. My compliance. I stayed at work. EB came over to me, asked how I was feeling, about halfway through my shift. I was not doing too well, but was scared of being written up, so I told her I was fine, as MF was also nearby. A few hours later, just as MF was about to go on his lunch, EB had finished her shift for the day. He came over and stops me, as I was about to get up from my till and walk to the women's bathroom. I was feeling very sick at that point. MF, see, I told you you'd be fine. Me, I threw up. Oops. He leaves, and me being me went to the bathroom, cleaned myself up whilst one of my coworkers got the in-store cleaner to sort out my workstation. I stayed until the end of my shift, another 2 hours. I was sobbing by the time I came out. Luckily, my dad was coming to get me, so I didn't have to wait too long. I let him know what had happened. My dad was fuming. I had already let him know about the threat of being written up if I had any more absences, when he tried to get me to stay home from work that day. Dad and I went in the next day to have a chat with MF and EB about the day before. MF wasn't working that day as he had called in sick, so we just spoke to EB alone. She was shocked to find out what had happened. None of the supervisors had informed her of what had happened. I put in a formal complaint with EB, and one of the other supervisors sat in to act as a witness. EB had not been informed either that I had been given a verbal warning over my so-called unexplained absences. I let EB know that I was actively looking for a new job, but asked that any references should come from her, rather than MF. I also let her know of the other comments he had made to me, about my boobs and the way I dressed, and other coworkers attested to hearing him say things like this to me. He was fired when he returned to work. I worked there on Moore Saturday, and handed in my notice of resignation at the end of the shift. I was technically still a temp, after 3 years, as I had never signed another contract after initial term had finished, and was only required to give 1 week's notice if I was leaving. The last story is, hurry up and keep changing your tire? Okay. I was a contracted service provider, tow truck driver for a major roadside assistance and travel organization, though the company I worked for was quite small. I had been sent to a lakeside neighborhood in my popular Northwest city, a neighborhood full of hip restaurants and cutesy boutiques, to change a tire on a new BMW. This was back when all cars had a spare tire, which should tell you how long ago this was. I had my own tools, but for the new BMWs it was always recommended to use the tools that came with the car, since they were less likely to cause damage. I had no problem with that, since the jack that came with the car was quite easy to use. It had been a crank instead of a jack handle. The only issue was that there needed to be enough clearance between the jack and any nearby immovable objects, such as say a curb. This particular vehicle was parked very close to the curb. My normal SOP is to ask the customer to slowly move the car away from the curb, to avoid damage to the rim of the flat tire. No one has an issue with this normally. The chucklehead owner of the vehicle refused to move it, claiming that it was going to ruin the tire. I told him that if he moved it slowly, it wouldn't damage anything. He wasn't buying it. I pointed out that the tire was already flat and likely needed to be replaced anyway, so no problem. He screeched at me, telling me to get on with it and change the tire, because he had places to be. Sigh. So I got to it, wanting to be clear of this chump as quickly as possible. This car's jack had a very low gear ratio, requiring several turns to lift the car even an inch. But the force required to turn the crank was not excessive, enabling the user to quickly turn the crank until the car was raised sufficiently. The issue with the car being too close to the curb is that while the jack's crank has a hinge to fold it compactly when stored, the crank must be unfolded completely to provide adequate leverage to turn and lift the car. But with it so close to the curb, the bottom of the arc of the crank's movement caused the handle to just barely clear the curb. Only problem was that I was holding the crank as it came around to the curb. Not enough room between the crank handle and the curb for my fat fingers. Yes, as a matter of fact, I did skin 2 knuckles down to the bone, with the scars still present to this day. And yes, I did use some colorful, unprofessional language. Captain Chucklehead heard this, and smugly announced that he was going to report my horrifying language and get me fired. He then reiterated his desire for me to get the lead out and finish changing the tire. Oh, really? See, my first aid kit was back in the truck, several dozens yards away. Well, since I didn't want to delay this person's day any longer than absolutely necessary, I just continued to change the tire, splattering crimson jewels of blood on the rim of the flat, on the spare, on the jack, on the lug wrench, on the fender. I made sure not to waste a single cell on the ground. I even managed to get a nice fat drippy drop on the window. His face went pale as he saw the biohazard scene unfolding all over his precious car. I even made him sign the form with a blood-smeared pen, though I gave him the opportunity to get his own. After he nearly caused an accident leaving the parking space, probably on his way to the car wash, I was then able to tend to my poor abused knuckles and get ready for whatever else the day would bring. Never heard a single squawk from my boss or from corporate. F that guy. Edit. For those who think I deliberately injured myself to take revenge against an entitled A-wagon, no. Just no. The injury was an accident caused by my misguided belief that the customer is always right and must be kowtowed to. The MC was my not tending to said injury, and instead completing the required task as quickly as possible, while just so happening to bleed all over the exterior of the car, thereby grossing out the owner. For those who say I should have just driven away, yep, you're right. The incident happened earlier in my career as a roadside assistance service provider, and I learned very quickly not to allow myself, or allow others to put me in situations where my safety or health was in jeopardy. My boss in corporate would have completely had my back in these kinds of situations. Thank you for watching.